Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homanoff, and thank you for joining us tonight. My guest this evening is Danny Bennett, the mastermind behind his father Tony Bennett's career in the music business for much of the last 3 decades. And Danny, thank you for joining us.
Great, mastermind sounds villainous.
In a good way, right?
Okay.
So we were chatting right before we got started here, and it sort of immediately raises a question for me, which is the so much success and of Tony's career. You know, we can go back many decades, but certainly I'm thinking in the last, the kind of MTV generation forward, and probably which is probably so much surprised people from the outside maybe.
Yeah.
How much of that is the serendipity of who knew versus wow, here's kind of the thoughtful, crafted approach to how we're going to do this?
Well, I mean, it's a good question and a hard one to answer because, we were talking about how important the stars being aligned is to, anything that we do in this industry, or any industry,
right.
really.
Sure.
You can hope. I think the advantage, and what's a little difficult for me to answer, is the advantage I have is having grown up in the industry, in the business. Tony's first contract with Columbia Records is a page and a half. And I've had, again, the opportunity.
The lunch contract would be much longer than that today.
Exactly,
right, yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, I've had the advantage of being able to read this. He's been with Columbia Records since 1951 and continues to be there. And so it's interesting, and it's actually would be a great class in itself to read you read the contract from the page and a half to now where it's 240 pages. But you see you actually witness and see the evolution of the industry through the word, which was pretty interesting for me. When I got involved with Tony, and I call him Tony professionally, because it's tough to say, Dad needs more royalties or whatever, advance, taken seriously. The advantage was that around 1979, the industry was coming out of the 60s. It was a very difficult time for artists such as Tony and Sinatra and Streisand and
right.
People who were doing what they call middle of the road music. The onslaught of the Beatles in the 60s took everyone by surprise. Into the 70s, we kind of got more into the corporate rock aspect of things, and those artists were kind of put aside, except for a couple of the hits. Tony had San Francisco and Once in My Life and Shadow Your Smile. Sinatra, I Did It My Way, and those kind of things. Streisand kind of reinvented herself with these duet records that she did, almost disco-ish. So it was interesting to see that evolution. So in '79, when I got involved with Tony, he was doing a lot of Vegas, and Vegas was changing. It was like 18 weeks contracts, and kind of getting stuck there. And I've always had an appreciation for the art of what he does. All right, and one of the great stories that I learned very early on, time when around the dinner table, an attorney became the president of Columbia Records. And now that sounds passé, but at the time, when Johnny Mercer owned Capitol Records, Sinatra had Reprise, it was an artist-run business. Then all of a sudden, a lawyer was going to be a president. This was unheard of.
And who was the lawyer?
Clive Davis.
Clive Davis. He's done okay for himself.
He's done fine. But at the time, it was a very, very jarring and shocking thing. And the impulse was to kind of fit the artist to marketing. You got to do more contemporary songs. People were doing, Beatles songs and those kind of things. And it wasn't working for Tony and a lot of artists at the time. It wasn't true to the art. So the story that was kind of made a difference for me in terms of my attitude, and I'm getting to the point about why it's important to understand how and what came first, chicken or the egg.
Right, yeah.
Duke Ellington was with Columbia Records, and at the time, Tony told me he saw him at the studio. He was going to see, as he said, the boss, Clive Davis, to get a raise. He went into Clive's office, and Clive said, you know, Duke, I have some news for you. We're going to have to drop you from the label. And Duke said, why? I don't understand. He goes, well, you're not selling enough records. And Duke said, well, I really don't understand. I thought I was supposed to make them, and you were supposed to sell them. Okay, so and then he walked out. So that was a very kind of crucial moment for me to understand that our job as marketers, okay, is to fit the marketing to the artist and find ways to take the true artist and bring that to a larger audience. And it's a lot more difficult to do, but it stays true to the legacy. I often say I don't handle a career, I handle a legacy. Yeah. And there's a whole different attitude in terms of you don't just take the money and run, because it's an investment, it's a long-term investment. It has to be a solid foundation. So when I started working with him, I felt that when I watched him perform, that his music transcended for me, and I thought, hey, nobody says that you have to be a certain age to go see Van Gogh in a museum, right? Right, yeah. And it's a simple concept, but so I was convinced that it just like a president, like running for president. I think that's kind of what I did with Tony, is got him to the people. Put him in front of college folks at the time, put him on shows that, it was at one point, we were doing a college show, Tony was performing with between 9 Inch Nails and PJ Harvey in front of 60,000 kids. Tony turns to me and says, can I ask you something, would Frank do this? And I said, no, he wouldn't, and that's exactly why we're doing it. And so he got it, and Tony's brilliant in terms of understanding what's necessary in order to create your own, your own niche and your own environment.
Well, how do you, that
does that answer your question? I know it's a roundabout way, but it's important to understand the distinction.
Right, no, I think it feels to me like there's both, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there are certain things that if the stars weren't aligned, don't happen, but you also got to manage the stars, no pun intended, a little bit.
Meet opportunity with preparedness. That's what Tony always says. Yeah. And it's true. If you're not willing to take chances, if you're not willing to, I don't even like to call them mistakes because they're not mistakes. Steve Ross, who ran Time Warner, right. He would never fire somebody for making a mistake because he used to say, if you weren't making mistakes, you weren't moving the needle. Yeah. And if you're not moving the needle, I don't want to be working with you. Yeah. So it's an important lesson.
So in managing a legacy, what guides you in the decisions, from the broad strategy to the specifics of we'll do this event, we won't do this event, I'll have Tony dress up like this, but I won't have him do that. How much of that is just the gut versus, I don't know, how much, you can research that or use data to help you with it, but what's that mix to guide a bunch of decisions which just feel you add the word legacy to it, it takes on more weight than here today, gone tomorrow.
I mean, for me, it's it sounds simple, and like I said, my advantage is that I've grown up in the business, so I've seen a lot of, early on in my life, I've seen a lot of successes and failures. I grew up in the 60s with the Beatles. I have to admit that, they wore everything on their sleeve. So not only were, in terms of the music, in a very short period of time, really, 64 to 69, you had not only from the music side taking chances and pushing the envelope, but a cultural move with every record that they did. They were very open about their private lives and their business lives, and if you were involved with that, you saw it and understood it. I learned a lot from that. I learned how marketing is not a bad word. It's the balance of art and commerce. The Beatles were experts at the balance of art and commerce. They made their commerce, they made their marketing an integral, fun part of what it was that they were trying to do artistically. And they didn't shy away from that. So the selling out aspect was wasn't important to them. Doing a song in 2 minutes and 50 seconds became a canvas. It's a challenge for them. So they reveled in that. Their heroes were Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers, and so they took an album to mean that it was a collection of singles, which is really interesting because they didn't have albums; they grew up on singles.
Does the artist have to be an integral part of the marketing for it to succeed, or can somebody else? I mean, you're in a pretty unique position that it's your father. It's kind of literally growing up with the artist and his art. But how much does the artist need to be involved versus the Duke Ellington? You sell, I'll make records.
As a marketer, I believe you need to listen. And it's not so much that the artist is always involved. The artist, it always starts there because you can't, unless, look, there's McDonald's and then there's Tiffany's, right? So 3 billion hamburgers sold. You can do that, and a lot of people are going to like that. Politics, same thing. You can have Ronald Reagan, who will listen to what everybody says, or you're going to have Obama, who's going to march to his own drum, right? So it depends on who the artist is. But for a true artist with a legacy and a future, you have to listen to what that artist wants to achieve, and then as a marketer, understand and figure out ways that you're going to be able to nurture that and reach it. We have, when I say we, notice I just naturally say that. I have a team of people that I work with, and it's not just one person. It's a team of people that I've had for 25 years over this period of time, and they really understand what it is that we're going after, and it's important for us to keep true to that. We need to reinvent Tony every year, which is strange. I mean, if you think about this. We reinvent Tony, but he does the same thing. Right. He's singing the Great American Songbook. Right, But see, Tony is always taking chances himself with his music. And
so it's not attention to him. When you say, excuse me, you're reinventing him every year, it is an attention that, hey, nobody needs to reinvent. I mean, it's sort of kind of a part of what you just have to do.
What generational, if we don't keep an eye on the upcoming generation. So, we just did this Cheek to Cheek with Lady Gaga. Our first duets record, which, Tony has sold 10 million records in the last 10 years, which is pretty incredible with all this talk of, no one sells records anymore, no one's buying anymore. And here's Tony selling 10 million records. Adele sold 10 million records of the one record, over an 8-year period. Over an 8-year period, Tony's, so you have to look at it that way. So it's pretty interesting from that perspective.
Cheek to Cheek really has been such a phenomenal success.
Oh, what I was going to say, I'm sorry, but Lady Gaga in our first 2006, how old was she? She's 28 now. And you look at it and you go oh my goodness, it's 20-year anniversary of MTV Unplugged, and those quote unquote kids that were listening to Tony. I considered I was really going for 30-year-olds and those guys, but they're approaching 50.
Right. Yeah.
And that's you're vested. You're invested in your. It's kind of building your infrastructure, and we continue to do so. So with Lady Gaga and that audience, knowing who Tony Bennett is and understanding that there's other. For me, the biggest accomplishment that Tony achieved in the 90s with MTV Unplugged is he really heralded in the iTunes. The iTunes generation, where it's okay to have the Pixies and Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and Billie Holiday and Tony Bennett. It's okay. Yeah. And it wasn't okay before that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of his greatest accomplishments, and he continues to do it, and he's 88 years old.
Well, it reminds me, and you had produced, or your team had produced this terrific documentary a couple years ago, The Zen of Bennett, which I really loved, and there's this great moment where I think it's around the John Mayer session, and Tony says, I don't do demographics.
Everybody's favorite part.
I don't do demographics. I sing to all the people. So at the risk of upsetting your father, what do the demographics look like for, how much do you pay attention to that in terms of who's buying Cheek to Cheek or who's buying the tickets, for events and things? What does it look like, and what's it telling you?
Well, the interesting thing about that section, which is everyone's favorite section, and is my
I thought I was unique in that.
Well, it was my no. It's my most but it's my most uncomfortable.
But it's great. It's great. It's great. It's great on film. Yeah.
Well, what's great about it, I'll tell you, and for me, is that we don't pay attention to demographics, and that's how we're successful with it. If we were paying attention to demographics, then we would say, no, we can't. No, well, we shouldn't go there. We go everywhere, right? So that's what I was explaining in the film. But from Tony's point of view, he's so zeroed in on he doesn't like demographics. He doesn't really understand that that's exactly what we're accomplishing. But that's okay because he's in the eye of the storm. Yeah. And I often say to him that you're in the eye of the storm, but when I'm walking down the street, it happened to us, last spring. A school bus drives by, but I'm talking about middle school kids chanting Tony and waving, and he just stared at me and goes, "This is incredible." Yeah. So to a certain extent, for him, it's a little bit unbelievable, right? For me, it's not. I'm like, there you go. Yeah. What demographics?
So how have you, from a marketing perspective, have things changed for you in the last, 5 years, 10, 25, in terms of the way you take, again, a guy doing the same stuff to some degree, which is, again, those great songs and he's still got the tie and the look, right?
What did he say in the film? He said, my tie. He says, I like to be different.
Yeah, I mean,
well, there you go, though.
There it is. So, but marketing that, how have you been changing? Dealing with social media and online video and all these other platforms. How's that been changing for you?
Well, and again, advantage growing up in the business. The studio business, wiring and building studios, being in bands. Technology's never scared me. I think that our industry has stumbled. Because you had a lot of people who didn't understand the technology. As far as I'm concerned, it's all data, right? So it's like water, it flows. And it doesn't matter what pipe you put in. If it's a jukebox or if it's Spotify, to me they're the same thing. Yeah. It satisfies the same need. Your public relations is the same. Is it magazines? Is it People, Life magazine? We don't have Life magazine anymore. But we have Facebook and we have social. We're able to reach the fans directly, which is something everybody loved to do. The Beatles had their fan club religiously every Christmas. They do a Christmas message. It's all the same principle. It's just that we have greater opportunity right now. And understanding, the most important thing is to understand your tools. All right. So in business school, you learn your tools. Everyone has the same paints, right? The difference between Rembrandt and the Impressionists were that the paints changed. They got brighter colors, all right? And Gauguin and Van Gogh, they painted differently. Monet did different. We all have the same tool set. It depends on what our creativity is, and that's something you can't learn in school.
Danny, one of the things I want to ask you a little bit more about is the technology around the business and how much, people think in a creative endeavor, I'm a creative guy, right? I'll let somebody else know technology, but how much did you have to learn about technology, understand it to be able to succeed in the whole creative and marketing enterprise? Yeah,
as I was saying, understanding your tools is the most important part of anything being creative. If you're an artist, you have to understand how to mix colors, if you're a painter. And understanding the studio, so that as an artist you can get what it is that you're going after. Producers play a huge role there, but it's always great when you have artists who understand production and can eliminate the middleman. It's always a great thing. But for me, was never scared of technology, and I view music now as data, whether it's on a wax disc, whether it's on a CD, whether it's on through broadband. It matters little to me. And the basic components, the 101 of marketing, of fan clubs, social networking, of distribution. They're all the same. So, the jukebox came about when somebody had the smart idea of like, hey, people can't listen to their records when they go out and eat, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, we have radio. Well, no, but that means that they can't choose what they want. So someone came up with the idea of putting records in a box where people could put money in and choose what they want to hear. It's what we're doing today, right? Choice. And to me, it's just the same thing. I am a huge believer in subscription base, and that we'll get whatever we want, and that's books, that's music, any cultural arts, and it's a wonderful thing. It's just that our industry has stumbled with it. Spotify is a great thing. Let's take out Spotify. Streaming companies are going to be a wonderful thing, but artists aren't getting paid what they should. And there are various reasons for that. And as far as I'm concerned, it's again comes down to 101. If you give your product away, no one's going to buy it. And I've had a hard time talking this through with a lot of different people. If artists get paid for it and they want to get, and the labels want to give it away, that's fine with me. But the idea here is that artists need to get paid for what they do, and that's the most important thing. But you see, Taylor Swift took the bold move of not putting a record up on streaming. Why? Because she sold 4 million records. And with Cheek to Cheek, it was very important for me. I didn't have the ability to keep it off streaming, but I felt that Gaga's audience, if given the choice of buying a record for $15.99 or streaming it for free, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah. So what I want to ask you about the labels, and there's been so much written over so long a period of time about kind of the music industry's slow and or the failure to deal, whether fast enough or well enough, with the digital revolution. You've been with Columbia, or Tony's been with Columbia since 1951, I think you said.
Yeah.
Where is the label? How important is the label still to you? Or you can make it more broadly, not necessarily you or only Tony's
general
business, but how important are still the labels today versus, does it just not matter and we're all entrepreneurs at this?
It's a really hard question to answer because I think that it would take a semester. Seriously,
Yeah.
I mean, and it deserves it too, because I think it is important to understand how it has stumbled and what can be done. I just know that I cut my teeth on the fact that Tony didn't have the normal avenues like radio, right? So, in the 90s when everyone was switching over from vinyl to CDs, there was this huge upsurge. People, the old adage of when the tide goes out, you can see who's wearing bathing suits.
Yeah.
We're at the point where the tide is out. So my adage is, and I always say this, is that when business is good and you do bad business, it's okay. But when business is bad and you're doing bad business, you better look out. And we're seeing that happen now. Steve Jobs came in at a time and was smart about it and spent money marketing. He wasn't really concerned about the music. He wanted to sell hardware. But I think that's why Sony bought CBS or Columbia Records to begin with, and somehow lost their way with that. But Steve Jobs stepped in, did what needed to happen. Napster came along, and we didn't embrace it. They tried to fight it, and those are huge mistakes. 100% of nothing is nothing, at a certain point. So yeah, they own masters, but at the same time, you kind of back themselves into a corner to possibly become obsolete, because if you have distribution, self-distribution, just like the self-publishers now, right?
Yeah.
Why do you need a publisher? Well, you like advances,
but
then no one's paying advances anymore.
Right.
So
right.
What?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, when you start becoming successful, we'll give you money, and you're going like, well, when I'm successful, I don't need your money.
Then I don't need you, right?
So it's a conundrum,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot that people can do on the independent side, or have done on the independent side. I worked on a Pearl Jam record, Backspacer. They didn't have a label. And with Tony, we had to make deals, third-party deals to, our industry doesn't have the kind of marketing dollars like the movie industry can spend 40 million, 50 million promoting. Well, we just don't have that. So I had an acronym, OPIUM, Other People's Money, OPM. And I applied that throughout the early 2000s.
How about the broadcast business in terms of as a marketing tool or as a business today? What's your perspective on radio, particularly to a lesser extent television? You obviously made great use of it with MTV and in the 90s, but particularly talk about the radio business and how important is that still?
Well, let's talk about TV a little bit, but you need to be bold. And one of the things that we did with 2006 was we did the deal with Target, huge, great partners for us. It wasn't just like your week-long, 10-day thing. I pitched kind of a 6-month partnership where we educate the consumer. It's important to educate the consumer so they understand what's coming in. It's not just a flash in the pan, and they don't. Again, they feel a sense of discovery.
Did you have to educate Target in that before you educated the consumer?
Of course, because it's like Tony Bennett and Target. They were, why would we do that?
Right.
Well, we talked about doing, Tony's birthday on August 3rd, releasing the record in September, and then having, I kind of pitched this idea of a television special around Thanksgiving that was brought to you by Target. Target Presents, just like the old days. Singer presents.
Star Theater,
and
whatever.
They love the idea, And I said, now they're creatively vested, and we didn't just do a music show. We got Rob Marshall from Chicago, and he had just done Geisha the movie to direct this, and we won 9 Emmys, and did quite well. Is it tough to do? Yeah, it's tough to pull off, but but
it feels like there's a huge. So what you're describing though feels like a huge missed opportunity. In the 80s and 90s, MTV seemed central to the music business.
Yeah, you gotta
where do you?
You gotta stay in front of the wave.
What MTV? The old joke is, I remember MTV when they actually, had music on there. Where's the music in TV much today?
Well, look, there's no joke. We used to have 3 networks, and now there's what, 800 opportunities. So when the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan, you had 70 million people tune in. Well, they could watch Bonanza, and they could, so that we don't have that anymore. So it's desperate, and again, getting everybody into one area. But Ted Sarandos brilliantly in terms of the understanding the idea of streaming and understanding that people don't have brand loyalty anymore. So what we can do now is have it when we want it. And if you want to watch Breaking Bad through the whole thing, you can and will, or House of Cards. There it is. And it's a different way of thinking. No LPs anymore. We're kind of back to singles. And now it's up to the artists to make sure that every song they do is a single, which is back to the Beatles.
Well, Danny, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate you being here. And thank you for joining us tonight on CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homanoff. Good night.